the myrtle fell before the bride did. For one terrible breath in the private chapel off Hanover Street, London held itself so still that Lady Leocadia Harrowden heard the small snap of crushed green stems beneath Lord Cyprian Bexley's polished shoe. The sound should not have carried above the silk rustle of seated ladies, the dry cough of old Lord Meryton in the second pew, or the faint creak of the chaplain's prayer book as his fingers tightened around it. Yet it did. It seemed to travel up the pale stone aisle, under the carved angels, past the white roses tied to each pew, and settle like a verdict against her ribs. She had been holding the little bridal posy only moments before. Myrtle and white rosebuds bound with narrow lace from her mother's workbox. Now half of it lay broken on the chapel floor, its leaves bruised dark where Cyprian had stepped back from her as if her touch had burned him. "I can't," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. It was not loud, but every person heard it. Leocadia did not move. Her veil softened the faces before her into a wash of pale ovals and watching eyes. Her father, Lord Septimus Harrowden, made a sound that was almost a warning. Lady Pentreath lifted one gloved hand to her mouth with exquisite delay. Beside her, Lady Eudora Pentreath lowered her lashes, but not quickly enough to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. The chapel smelled of beeswax, damp stone, crushed greenery, and the faint sweetness of too many hothouse roses forced into bloom for a marriage that had just died before the vows. Cyprian's hand trembled. Leocadia saw it because she would not allow herself to look away. He was handsome in the careless Bexley way. Fair where his elder brother was dark, golden where the Duke of Wyntham was said to be iron. He had once laughed easily in her father's drawing room and told her that no woman in London listened as if every word mattered. She understood now that he had mistaken being listened to for being loved. "Lord Cyprian," the chaplain said faintly. "Do you require a moment?" Cyprian swallowed. His gaze flicked toward the vestry door, then toward Lady Eudora, then down at the posy beneath his shoe. He stepped away from it, but the damage was done. "I said I can't." A murmur ran through the chapel, quick and hungry. It began among the younger ladies at the back, passed through the matrons, and settled among the gentlemen who knew how to make ruin sound like concern. Leocadia felt each whisper touch her skin. Too pale, too quiet. Poor thing, there must be a reason. There was always a reason when a woman was abandoned. Society could not bear an unexplained cruelty. It preferred to invent a flaw in the victim and call the matter balanced. Her father's fingers closed around the head of his cane. "Cyprian," Lord Septimus said, low and furious, "you will remember where you stand." Cyprian flinched, but not with remorse, with fear. That was when Leocadia understood that this humiliation had not arrived alone. It had been carried in by some prior terror, some whispered promise or threat that had reached him before the chapel doors opened. She should have asked him why. She should have demanded the truth in front of them all. Instead, she breathed once, slowly, because her mother had taught her that dignity was sometimes the only inheritance a woman could keep when men had spent everything else. She lifted her chin. The veil trembled, but her voice did not. "Then you must step aside, my lord." A sharper silence followed. It startled even Cyprian. He stared at her as if he had expected tears, pleading, a collapse into bridal lace and shame. Leocadia gave him none of it. She drew her hand away from where his should have been. The movement was small. It felt like cutting a rope. "Leocadia," her father hissed. "Do not make a spectacle." She almost turned toward him then, almost. But the cruelty of those words steadied her more than kindness could have done. She had not made the spectacle. She had only survived being placed at its center. "The spectacle has already been made, Papa," she said softly. "I am merely standing in it." Someone inhaled. Someone else whispered her name as if courage were another form of impropriety. Cyprian took another step back, his heel striking the edge of the fallen myrtle. A green stain marked the pale stone. At the same instant, from the first pew on the groom's side, the Duke of Wyntham rose. Aurelian Bexley did not rise quickly. He did not need to. Power moved differently in men who had never had to chase attention. He was tall, dark-haired, severe in a black coat cut with such precision that he seemed less dressed than armored. Leocadia had seen him only twice before. Once across a crowded supper room, where every mother with an unmarried daughter had angled herself toward him like flowers seeking winter sun. Once in her father's library, where he had said very little, but noticed the unpaid account ledger half hidden beneath a newspaper. She had thought him cold then. Not cruel. Cold was cleaner than cruelty. It did not pretend to be warmth. Now his gaze moved from Cyprian's bloodless face to the crushed myrtle, then to Leocadia's hands, still held together because she did not trust them apart. Last, he looked toward the vestry step. His expression did not change, but something in the chapel changed around him. The whispers weakened. Rank had entered the silence. A duke was among the highest ranks below royalty, and even scandal made room when a duke chose to stand. "Cyprian," Aurelian said. His voice was quiet. It carried better than anger. "Look at me." Cyprian did, unwillingly. "Who sent for you before the service?" The question landed with the force of a dropped candelabrum. Lady Eudora's gloved fingers tightened over her fan. Leocadia saw it, because Aurelian's eyes flicked there for the briefest instant, and her own followed. Cyprian shook his head. "No one. You were seen entering the vestry. I needed air. You had air in the chapel." Aurelian took one step into the aisle, not toward Cyprian, toward the fallen myrtle. "You also had a bride." The words were not loud enough to be called a public rebuke, which made them more devastating. Cyprian's face flushed. "You don't understand." "No," Aurelian said. "I do not, but I intend to." He bent then, before the entire chapel, and picked up the broken sprig Leocadia's breath caught. Not because he touched it, but because he paused before offering it to her. His gloved hand remained open, the bruised myrtle resting across his palm like a small green body. "Lady Leocadia," he said, and his voice altered, not softened entirely. That would have been too much, too soon. But it lowered so that the room had to strain to hear him. "May I return this to you?" It was the first permission anyone had asked of her that morning. The sting of it nearly undid her. She held out her hand. Their gloves did not touch. He placed the sprig carefully into her palm and withdrew before society could make even that into another rumor. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. Her voice remained steady. He looked at her then, truly looked, and she had the unsettling sense that he saw not the veil, not the ruined arrangement, not the abandoned bride, but the effort it cost her to keep breathing evenly. "Do you wish privacy?" he asked. "Witnesses or a public answer?" Lord Septimus made a strangled sound. "Your Grace, this is a family matter." Aurelian did not turn his head. "It ceased to be private when my brother humiliated your daughter before half of London." The words should have warmed her. They frightened her instead, because they were exact. No gallantry, no ornament, no comforting lie that this could be mended quietly if everyone smiled hard enough. Leocadia closed her fingers around the crushed myrtle, its damp leaves pressed against her glove. "I want," she said, then stopped. Every eye waited to learn what a ruined bride dared want. Her throat tightened, but she refused to lower her gaze. I want the doors closed before anyone carries a version of this into the street that I have not heard myself. Aurelian's eyes sharpened with something that might have been approval. He turned to the footman stationed near the entrance. Close the chapel doors. The command moved faster than gossip. The heavy doors shut with a measured thud. Several guests stirred, offended by the loss of immediate escape. Lady Pentrith's mouth flattened. Lady Eudora looked again toward the vestry, and this time Leocadia saw fear beneath the polish. Aurelian saw something else. He stepped past the crushed green stain on the stone and bent near the vestry threshold. When he straightened, a small silver disc lay between his gloved fingers, no larger than a coin, engraved with a crest Leocadia could not make out from where she stood. But Lady Eudora could. All the colour left her face. Aurelian turned the silver counter once, slowly, so that the chapel candles caught its edge. His expression remained unreadable. His voice did not. "How curious," he said, looking not at Cyprian now, but at the Pentrith pew. "A household message counter has fallen in a most sacred place." The silence that followed was no longer hungry. It was afraid. The chapel doors had scarcely closed before the room divided itself into those who wished to escape and those who wished to watch more closely. Lady Leocadia Harrowden stood at the altar with the bruised myrtle resting in her gloved palm, its crushed leaves damp against the white kid. She could feel the little broken stems as distinctly as if they had been pressed into her skin. Before her, Lord Cyprian Bexley looked smaller with every breath. Behind him, the Duke of Wyntham held the silver message counter between two fingers, its Pentrith crest catching the candlelight like a secret that had made the mistake of shining. "Your Grace," Lady Pentrith said at last, with a smile so thin it seemed cut from glass. "Surely this is not the moment to examine household trifles." Aurelian Bexley did not glance at her. "A chapel where my brother has abandoned a bride is precisely the place to examine trifles." His voice was quiet, and the quiet made the words worse. Great scandals are often carried in small objects. Lady Eudora's fan opened with a soft snap. Cyprian stared at the silver counter as if it might accuse him aloud. Leocadia watched his face and saw no lover's regret there. She saw panic, she saw guilt. Most painfully, she saw relief that the disaster had already happened and could no longer be prevented. Lord Septimus moved to her side. He smelled of bay rum, wool, and anger barely contained. "Leocadia," he said under his breath, "you will say nothing more. Do you understand me? We must preserve what can be preserved." For a moment she felt 8 years old again, standing beside her mother's closed pianoforte, while creditors waited in the hall, and her father instructed her to smile because Harrowdens did not advertise misfortune. She had learned then that silence could be dressed as dignity until no one remembered the difference. Her fingers closed around the myrtle. "What can be preserved, Papa?" she asked softly. "Or your credit?" His face darkened. "This is no time for insolence." "No," Aurelian said, and now he did look at Lord Septimus. "It is a time for accuracy." The Earl of Larkswell stiffened. He was not accustomed to being corrected before witnesses, but he was also not foolish enough to mistake himself for a duke's equal. Aurelian turned to the chaplain. "Mr. Ardent, open the vestry, if you please. The bride should not be made to stand in the aisle, while gentlemen discuss the remains of her life as if she were not present." A ripple moved through the chapel. Leocadia did not know. whether she was more shocked by the words or by the sudden dangerous warmth that rose behind her ribs. The chaplain fumbled with his key. Cyprian took one step toward the side door, but Aurelian's voice stopped him. "You will remain. I have nothing more to say. You have a great deal more to answer." "Damn it, Aurelian, don't make this worse. You made it public. I am making it orderly." That silenced him. The vestry door opened onto a small, panelled chamber smelling of ink, wax, and old prayer books. A narrow table stood beneath a high window. The chaplain's register lay closed upon it, ready for a marriage that had not occurred. Leocadia stepped inside first, because she could not bear to be guided like a fainting creature. Her knees felt strangely far away, but they obeyed her. Aurelian followed, then Lord Septimus, the chaplain, Cyprian, and Lady Pentrith with Eudora. 2 senior family witnesses were permitted to stand near the door. The rest remained in the chapel, deprived of details, but not of suspense. That, Leocadia thought, would anger them almost as much as scandal delighted them. Aurelian placed the silver counter on the table. He did not release it until the chaplain had seen the crest. Record that this was found near the vestry step immediately after Lord Cyprian refused the ceremony. Lady Pentrith gave a soft laugh. "You cannot expect Mr. Ardent to record every dropped token in Mayfair. I expect him to record an object connected to the household of a guest who is now anxious to dismiss it." Eudora's cheeks flushed delicately. "Your Grace, you cannot mean to suggest that my mother's house arranged your brother's change of heart." "I have suggested nothing." Aurelian's gaze rested on Cyprian, yet Leocadia looked down at the myrtle in her hand. It should have smelled fresh and bridal. Instead, the bruised leaves released a sharp green scent, almost bitter. Aurelian noticed. He noticed everything. His expression changed only slightly, but he reached toward the table, then stopped before touching the sprig or her hand. "Lady Leocadia," he said, low enough that the words belonged first to her and only afterward to the room. "May I return that to your prayer book, or would you prefer to keep it?" The question struck her harder than any pity could have done. She had been directed all morning. "Stand here. Hold this. Smile, accept him. Save us." Now a man with the power to command half the county asked permission over a broken flower. Her throat tightened, but she did not let the tears come. "I will keep it," she said. "For now, as you wish." He withdrew his hand at once. No one else seemed to understand why that mattered. She did. Lord Septimus cleared his throat impatiently. "Your Grace, whatever your brother has done, the practical matter remains. My daughter cannot walk out of this chapel ruined. There are arrangements to consider. Settlements. Explanations. There is your daughter to consider first. My daughter's welfare is precisely my concern." Leocadia almost laughed, but the sound would have broken something in her that she still needed. Aurelian looked at her. "Is it?" The question was not cruel. It was worse. It was honest. Lord Septimus flushed. "You go too far. Not nearly far enough." Aurelian turned fully toward Leocadia. "Lady Leocadia, I can offer you 3 choices, and none will be pressed upon you. First, you may leave this chapel under my protection, with your maid and a female relation or companion, and no person here will speak to the street before I have spoken to them. Second, you may retire and delay all decision until morning. Third, if you wish to prevent my brother's cowardice from becoming the final word on your name, I can publicly place myself in his stead as your protector and intended husband. I cannot lawfully replace him under the same license. I will not insult you with a false ceremony, but I can send for my solicitor, petition for the proper special license, and marry you within 48 hours if, and only if, you choose it." The vestry seemed to shrink around her. Cyprian made a strangled sound. Lady Pentreath went very still. Eudora's fan stopped moving. Lord Septimus's eyes sharpened, not with concern, but calculation. Leocadia felt it like cold water. A duke, a lawful marriage, a salvaged name, a rescued credit line. Her father saw all of it before he saw her. "Leocadia," he said quickly, "you must be sensible. His Grace's generosity is extraordinary. You will accept." There it was, the old command dressed in a new coat. Her future moved from one brother to another as if she were a parcel misdirected by a careless footman. She looked at Aurelian, searching for triumph, vengeance, possession, anything that would tell her. This was merely another bargain made over her head. She found none of those things. His face was severe, but his eyes remained on hers, not on her father. He was waiting, truly waiting. "Would I be your punishment for him?" she asked. The room seemed to forget how to breathe. Cyprian looked away. Aurelian did not. "No. Would I be your answer to gossip? Not enough. That is not an answer." Something like respect moved through his expression. "Then no, you would not be my punishment for him, nor my answer to gossip. If you became my wife, it would be because I asked, and you consented. If you refuse me, I will still protect your departure from this chapel." The bitterness of the myrtle filled her palm. "And if I accept? Then I will spend the rest of this day ensuring the world understands that you were not discarded. You were failed by one man and honored by another." The words were too dangerous to believe. They were also the first words that had not asked her to disappear for the comfort of others. Leocadia looked at Cyprian once. Whatever softness she had once saved for him faded with the sight of his lowered head. Then she looked at her father and saw hunger for rescue, not repentance. At last she looked back at the Duke of Wyntham. "I will not be traded," she said. "No, I will not be hidden as if the shame were mine. No, and I will not be told later that gratitude is the same thing as obedience." For the first time, the corner of his mouth altered, not enough to be a smile, but enough to suggest he had heard every word beneath the words. "I would not dare make such a poor argument to you." A breath escaped her, almost unsteady, almost. She lifted the crushed myrtle between them. "Then before these witnesses, I accept your protection, your grace, and if the proper license is obtained, I will consider your proposal as my choice, not my rescue. That is all I ask." Lord Septimus started to speak, but Aurelian's hand lifted, and the Earl stopped. "Mr. Ardent," the Duke said, "you will make a memorandum of what Lady Leocadia has stated, not what her father prefers, not what my brother regrets. Her words." The chaplain nodded, shaken into obedience. In the chapel beyond the vestry door, whispers rose again like wind under a sill. Aurelian took the silver counter from the table and placed it inside his inner coat pocket. The movement was precise. One object, one possessor, one secret not yet solved. Then he opened the vestry door and faced the waiting room. "Lord Cyprian Bexley has withdrawn from the marriage," he said, his voice carrying to every pew. "Lady Leocadia Harrowden remains under my protection. No person will leave this chapel carrying any account that suggests otherwise." Lady Eudora's smile had vanished. Leocadia stepped into the aisle beside him, the bruised myrtle still in her hand. The chapel that had watched her abandoned now watched her choose. It was not victory. Not yet, but it was the first moment of her life in which ruin had been offered a door, and she had walked through it upright. By the second morning, after the chapel doors had closed upon gossip and astonishment, London had already tried to write 3 endings for Lady Leocadia Harrowden. In one, she had fainted into disgrace and been carried home by a father too mortified to speak. In another, she had schemed so cleverly that a younger son's rejection had become a duke's proposal before the candles burned down. In the third, whispered with the most relish over chocolate cups and breakfast trays from Brook Street to Grosvenor Square. She had never been the injured party at all. She had been ambitious. Ambition, society decided, looked much neater on a woman than pain. Leocadia knew none of the exact phrases when she returned to the same private chapel 48 hours later, but she felt them in the way the witnesses looked at her. Their eyes moved first to her face, then to her gown, then to the small prayer book held between her gloved hands. Inside it, pressed carefully between 2 clean pages, lay the bruised myrtle sprig Aurelian Bexley had returned to her in the vestry. Its leaves had darkened at the edges. It no longer looked bridal. That was why she had kept it. Pretty things were too easily called false after they were damaged. Living things told the truth. The chapel had been stripped of most of the wedding roses from 2 days before, though the air still carried a faint sweetness beneath the wax and stone. The chaplain, Mr. Ardent, stood pale and rigid before the altar, as if afraid one more unexpected word might bring the roof down. Lord Septimus Harrowden stood behind his daughter, with a face composed into paternal concern. Leocadia did not trust that expression. She had seen it turned toward creditors, neighbors, and grieving tenants. It meant he was calculating which version of himself the room would reward. Near the groom's side stood Aurelian Bexley, Duke of Wyntham, severe in dark mourning dress, his stillness more commanding than any flourish could have been. His solicitor had obtained the proper special license. The chaplain had read and reread the papers. No false ceremony would be performed. No convenient lie would be dressed as honor. That should have comforted her. Instead, it made the moment more real. Cyprian had not returned. His absence sat in the chapel like an empty chair at a deathbed. Lady Pentrith had come, though she had not been invited with warmth. Lady Eudora came with her, all pale muslin, smooth gloves, and eyes bright enough to cut. Leocadia wondered whether she had practiced looking wounded on behalf of the family she had helped to injure. Aurelian's gaze found Leocadia before the ceremony began. He did not smile. He did not soften the room with false romance. He simply inclined his head, as if acknowledging not a rescued woman, but an equal entering an agreement she had chosen under impossible pressure. That small recognition steadied her more than any vow could have done. "Are you ready, Lady Leocadia?" Mr. Ardent asked. Her father shifted behind her, almost imperceptibly. A warning, a hope, a command. Leocadia did not look back. "I am," Aurelian's voice followed, lower and firmer. "So am I." The ceremony was brief, proper, and unbearably clear. Each word entered the register, as if cutting a path not a whisper could erase. When Leocadia spoke her vow, she heard the tremor that nearly came and did not. When Aurelian spoke his, the chapel changed. She had expected control. She heard something heavier. Not love, not yet, but responsibility accepted in full, before witnesses, without embarrassment. He did not look at the guests when he said the words. He looked at her. When the ring was placed, his gloved fingers did not linger. Yet the restraint itself had a strange intimacy. He knew the room would devour anything softer. He gave it nothing it could use against her. The register was signed under Mr. Ardent's watchful eye. Leocadia wrote her name with a steady hand. Leocadia Harrowden. Then, beside it, The new title waited in silence. Duchess of Wyntham. The ink shone wetly for a moment before sinking into the page. Aurelian signed after her, precise and dark. The legal fact existed. London might twist motives, invent history, and poison drawing rooms. But it could not unwrite that line. Afterward, the wedding breakfast felt less like celebration than negotiation performed with silver forks. It was held in the Chapel House dining room rather than at Lord Septimus's rented rooms by Aurelian's direction. The table was elegant, controlled, and not quite festive. White linen, tea, cold meats. Small cakes no one seemed willing to taste. Aurelian seated Leocadia at his right hand before anyone else could decide she belonged lower. "Her Grace will sit here," he said. "Her Grace." The words moved down the table and struck each guest differently. One elderly aunt blinked as if waking from a dream. Lady Pentrith's mouth tightened. Eudora lowered her teacup too carefully. Lord Septimus looked almost radiant for half a second before remembering to appear solemn. Leocadia sat. The chair felt impossibly large beneath her, as if generations of duchesses had left invisible expectations in the carved arms. She kept the prayer book in her lap beneath the table, one hand resting over it. Aurelian noticed, of course. He said nothing. That silence was becoming a language between them. For several minutes, the conversation remained brittle but survivable. The weather was mentioned, the sudden warmth of May. A tedious remark about roads to Kent. Then Lord Septimus leaned forward, unable to resist the true appetite that had brought him through the morning. "Your Grace, regarding the settlement arrangements. Naturally, there are matters of family obligation that must now be reconsidered." Leocadia's fingers tightened on the prayer book. Aurelian set down his knife. The sound was soft. The table heard it. "No," Lord Septimus froze. "I beg your pardon." "No," Aurelian repeated. "There will be no discussion of Her Grace's settlement at this breakfast." A dull red crept up her father's neck. "As her father, I have every right to ensure that her interests are protected. You had that opportunity before you urged her to accept any arrangement that would preserve your credit." The silence went sharp. Leocadia stared at the white cloth, but she did not lower her head. Lord Septimus looked around as if seeking support. None came quickly enough. A duke had spoken. Rank did what tenderness could not. It made greed hesitate. Lady Pentrith smiled faintly. "How admirable, Your Grace, to be so protective after so brief an attachment. One might almost think the matter had been settled in certain hearts before it was settled in law. There it was. Leocadia felt the room lean toward the implication. Eudora looked at her then, not with open triumph, but with delicate pity. No one could blame Lady Leocadia for accepting a better fate than the one first offered, she said. A woman in shock can rise very quickly when a higher hand is extended. Aurelian turned his head, but Leocadia spoke before he could. "I did not rise by stepping on anyone, Lady Eudora." Her own voice surprised her. It was not loud, it was not sweet, it was simply hers. "I was left standing in a chapel with a crushed bridal sprig in my hand. His Grace did not offer me a ladder. He offered me a choice." Eudora's eyes hardened. A convenient distinction. A necessary one. Leocadia looked from her to Lady Pentrith, then down the table where every guest pretended not to listen while listening with every nerve. "I did not ask Lord Cyprian to abandon me. I did not ask the room to watch. But I did choose not to be buried under the version of the story most comfortable to those who caused it." No one moved. Across the table, Aurelian looked at her with an expression so controlled that anyone else might have missed the change in him. Leocadia did not. His attention deepened as if admiration had entered the room, and found no proper place to sit. Lady Pentreath recovered first. A courageous speech from a new duchess. A truthful one, Aurelian said. 2 words. Enough. The breakfast did not recover its false ease. Lord Septimus remained silent over his untouched tea. Eudora spoke little. Lady Pentreath watched Aurelian with increasing caution. Near the sideboard, one of the chapel house footmen shifted his weight and stared too intently at the silver service. Aurelian saw that as well. After the guests began to rise, Mr. Holbury, the Duke's solicitor, entered quietly through the side door. He bowed first to Aurelian, then to Leocadia with exact respect. "Your Grace," he said to her, not to the Duke. To her. The title still startled her. "I have confirmed the object found by His Grace near the vestry step bears the Pentreath household crest. It appears to be a message counter of the sort used to identify trusted household errands." Lady Pentreath turned. "That is absurd. Any number of such counters might be misplaced by servants." "Indeed," Mr. Holbury said mildly. "That is why the record of its assignment will be of interest." For the first time, Eudora's composure slipped. Only for a heartbeat. Only enough for Leocadia to see fear beneath refinement. Aurelian saw it too. He did not pursue it in the breakfast room. He merely offered Leocadia his arm, formal and proper before witnesses. She looked at it, aware of every watching eye, then placed her hand lightly upon his sleeve. It was not rescue. It was not love. Not yet. But when they stepped past the table together, the whispers altered around them. She had entered that chapel 2 days ago as a woman left behind. She left it now as the Duchess of Wyntham, carrying a broken sprig, a new name, and the first sharp edge of the truth. The carriage waiting outside the chapel house looked less like escape than judgment with wheels. Black lacquered panels reflected the pale May sky, and the Bexley crest on the door seemed to watch Lady Leocadia Wyntham as she stepped toward it. With her prayer book held against her middle and her new name still settling around her like a garment cut for another woman. Behind her, the wedding breakfast had dissolved into stiff bows, murmured congratulations, and the kind of silence that did not mean peace. Lord Septimus had not embraced her. He had pressed his lips to her cheek and whispered, "Remember your duty to your blood," as if blood had not already been used to bargain away her mourning, her reputation, and almost her future. Aurelian heard it. Leocadia knew he heard it, because the hand he offered at the carriage step paused for the smallest fraction of a second, then steadied. He did not rebuke her father there in the open street. That restraint spared her another scene. It also told her he could be angry without needing an audience for it. "Your Grace," he said, and for one strange moment she did not understand he meant her. Then she placed her gloved hand upon his and entered the carriage. He followed only after the maid had been handed into the second carriage behind them, a fact so carefully arranged that even propriety could find little to criticize. The door closed. The chapel, the witnesses, and the faces of those who had watched her fall and rise became a framed picture through glass. Then the horses moved, and the wheels began their slow, grinding passage from one life into another. For several streets, neither of them spoke. London passed in polished fragments, a boy sweeping a step, a milliner's apprentice carrying a bonnet box, a pair of ladies turning their heads too late to pretend they had not recognized the Duke's carriage. Leocadia sat opposite Aurelian, her wedding gown gathered carefully around her, her prayer book on her lap. Inside it lay the bruised myrtle sprig. She could feel its presence more keenly than the ring on her finger. It was absurd that a crushed piece of greenery should weigh more than a duchess's title. But it did. Aurelian sat with his hat beside him, and one gloved hand resting near the silver knob of his cane. His face was composed, almost severe. If another woman had been in her place, perhaps she would have wished for soft words. Leocadia did not know what she wished for. Softness would have felt like a performance. Silence felt like an examination. At last, he said, "There are 4 things that may be done first when we reach Bexley House. You may rest. You may write to anyone you choose. You may have food sent privately. Or you may sit alone until you decide what is bearable." She looked at him. "That is a list, Your Grace." "It is. Not an instruction?" "No." The carriage turned, and a wash of light crossed his face. The angle revealed the faintest shadow beneath his eyes, as if he had not slept much during the 48 hours that had remade her life. He looked powerful enough to command streets, solicitors, footmen, chaplains, and frightened brothers. He did not look at ease. "Most people give instructions when they are uncomfortable," she said. "I have noticed. I give instructions when uncertainty would harm someone. And would my choosing harm someone? Not unless your choice is taken from you." The answer came too quickly to be flattery. Leocadia looked down before he could see how it affected her. The ring on her finger flashed, unfamiliar and cool. "Then I choose truth first." Aurelian's mouth tightened. About Cyprian, about whatever made him flee, about the counter, about whether I have married into a house that keeps its disasters behind velvet curtains until women trip over them. The bluntness should have embarrassed her. Instead, it freed a little air in her chest. Aurelian did not look offended. If anything, his attention sharpened. "My brother's debts are worse than society knows." The wheels struck a shallow rut. The prayer book shifted on her lap. "Gaming debts? Some. Promissory notes, private borrowings, obligations made foolishly because Cyprian believed charm was a form of currency." "It is," she said, before she could stop herself, "until the bill arrives." For the first time, something almost human moved in Aurelian's expression. Not amusement exactly, recognition. "Yes." He looked out the window for a moment, then back at her. In the last month, one of his notes appears to have passed through hands connected to a creditor who attends Lady Pentreath's circles. I knew he was under pressure. I did not know it would reach the chapel. You knew he might fail me. The words entered the carriage before she had softened them. Aurelian absorbed them without defense. I knew he was weak. That is not the same thing as knowing he would be cruel. It feels the same from where I stood. Silence. This one was different. It was not empty. It had been struck and was still ringing. Aurelian bowed his head once, not in surrender, but acknowledgement. You are right. Leocadia had expected an argument. The absence of one unsettled her. She tightened her hand around the prayer book, and the old lace marking the page slid loose. The myrtle sprig slipped with it, falling toward the carriage floor between them. She reached instinctively. So did he. Their gloved fingers met over the bruised leaves. The contact lasted no longer than a heartbeat. It was nothing. It was everything. Through kid leather, she felt not warmth exactly, but pressure. The reality of another human restraint meeting her own. Both of them went still. The carriage noise grew louder around the silence. Aurelian withdrew first. He drew his hand back slowly, leaving the sprig beneath her fingers, as if the right to recover it had always been hers. Leocadia picked it up and returned it to the prayer book. Her pulse had become embarrassingly visible in her throat. If he noticed, and of course he noticed, he gave no sign that would shame her. I beg your pardon, he said. You did nothing improper. Impropriety is rarely the only measure of harm. She looked up then. His face was calm, but the words were not cold. A man who thought that way might be dangerous to a woman's defenses. "No," she said, "it is not." The carriage slowed before a broad Mayfair house whose stone front bore all the quiet arrogance of old consequence. Bexley House did not glitter. It did not need to. Its windows were tall, its steps immaculate, its door black and polished, its brass so bright that the approaching footman appeared reflected and divided in it. A line of servants waited inside the hall when Leocadia entered, and for one breath she nearly faltered, not from fear of them, from the sudden knowledge that every person there had already heard some version of her. Abandoned bride, convenient duchess, brother's substitute. Aurelian stepped beside her, not before her. "Mrs. Thiel," he said to the housekeeper. "Her Grace's apartments are to be prepared in the Duchess's suite, not the south guest rooms, not the blue rooms, her own rooms." A woman in sober black silk curtsied deeply. "Yes, Your Grace." Several servants lowered their eyes. One young footman looked startled. Another, older and broader, looked almost displeased before he hid it. Leocadia saw both reactions. Aurelian did too. "All correspondence addressed to Her Grace is to be brought to her unopened," he continued. "No caller is to be admitted to her without her consent. No request from Lord Larkswell is to be treated as household instruction. If Lord Cyprian appears, he will wait in the front hall until I receive him." The displeased footman went pale. "Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Grace," the servants answered. The words moved through the hall like the striking of a clock. Leocadia felt the shape of the house change around her. Not warmly, not yet, but officially. Space had been made for her. Aurelian turned to her. "You may alter any of those instructions." "Why would I?" "Because they concern you. Such simple words, such impossible ones." She looked at the staircase, the servants, the portraits watching from gilded frames, and the man who had given commands, as if building a wall around her but left a gate in it for her own hand. "I would like them to stand," she said. "For now, then they stand." Mrs. Thiel approached with another curtsy. "Your Grace, shall I have tea sent to the Duchess's sitting room?" Leocadia almost said she was not hungry, because that was what women said when a room wanted them delicate and grateful. Aurelian's eyes flicked to her face, then away, leaving the answer to her. "Tea," she said, surprised by her own voice. "And bread, if it is no trouble." Mrs. Thiel's expression softened by a fraction. "No trouble at all, Your Grace." The title touched Leocadia differently this time, less like borrowed grandeur, more like a key she had not yet learned to use. Aurelian drew a sealed note from the tray a footman brought him. His expression changed as he read it. The air in the hall tightened. "What is it?" Leocadia asked. He did not hide the paper, but he did not hand it to her without explanation. "Cyprian has been seen entering a gaming house near St. James's under the protection of a man known to dine with Lady Pentrith's brother." The old humiliation stirred, but now it had a direction. "Then he did not flee love," she said. "No." Aurelian folded the note once. "He fled debt." Leocadia held her prayer book closer, the bruised myrtle safe inside. Across the hall, one servant listened too intently. In the Duke's eyes, she saw that he had noticed. The mystery had followed them home. So had the scandal. But for the first time since Cyprian had stepped away from her at the altar, Leocadia was not standing alone in the path of it. By the third morning at Bexley House, Lady Leocadia Wyntham had learned that a great house could whisper without using a human voice. It whispered through doors, opened a little too quickly, when she approached, through the pause, before servants remembered to say, "Your Grace," through the careful placement of newspapers turned face down upon silver trays. It whispered through the absence of Lord Cyprian Bexley, whose name no one spoke unless the Duke did first. Yet the loudest whisper came from the pile of calling cards Mrs. Thiel brought to the Duchess's morning room just after 10 o'clock, each small rectangle of pasteboard carrying a judgment disguised as civility. Lady Pentrith had sent hers. Lady Eudora Pentrith had sent hers beneath it, edged with the faintest scent of orris. Leocadia looked at the two cards without touching them. The morning room was beautiful in a severe, restrained fashion, with pale green walls, a writing table near the window, and enough books to suggest that some previous duchess had believed women should be allowed to think in comfort. Her prayer book rested on the desk, closed over the bruised myrtle sprig. She had not opened it since arriving. She did not need to see the damage to remember it. "Shall I say, Your Grace is not receiving?" Mrs. Thiel asked. Leocadia could feel the housekeeper studying her without staring. That, too, was a skill. "You may say Her Grace is not receiving Lady Pentrith or Lady Eudora today." Mrs. Thiel's eyebrows moved by the smallest degree. "Only today, Your Grace." Leocadia almost smiled. "For today, that is sufficient truth." "Very good, Your Grace." The housekeeper withdrew, and the room settled again. A covered breakfast tray waited near the fire, untouched. Tea steamed faintly beside rolls, butter, coddled eggs, and sliced pear. It was all perfectly arranged, and the perfection made her throat close. At Larkswell Court, breakfast had always been public, even when there was not enough money to make it generous. Her father believed meals proved order. A woman who did not eat enough invited concern. A woman who ate too much invited commentary. A woman watched while eating forgot hunger entirely. The door opened after a soft knock. Aurelian stood on the threshold in dark morning dress, one hand behind his back, his expression as controlled as ever. "May I enter? It is your house. It is also your room." The answer touched her before she was prepared for it. Then yes, he entered but did not close the door entirely. Beyond it, she glimpsed Mrs. Thiel moving along the corridor with deliberate slowness, propriety embodied in black silk. Aurelian noticed the untouched tray. He did not mention it at once. Instead, he placed several folded papers on the desk, far from her prayer book. "Your father has written? Already? Twice?" That startled a laugh from her, though it had no pleasure in it. He was never so prompt with affection. Aurelian's eyes lifted to hers. She regretted the sentence because it revealed more than she intended, but he did not seize upon it. The first letter asks whether you are well. The second asks when settlement access may be discussed. Then the first was written for witnesses. That was my conclusion. She looked toward the papers. "Have you opened them?" "No, Mrs. Thiel brought them to me because the old habit of this house is to route family correspondence through the master's study. I corrected the habit. They are yours." Such a simple thing, such a tremendous one. Her name on a letter had always been treated as an opening through which others might enter. "And if I ask you to read them?" "Then I will. If I ask you to burn them?" "I would advise against burning evidence of a man's priorities. But I would not stop you." She looked up. This time, the smile almost arrived. "You consider everything evidence. Nearly everything is." His gaze moved briefly to the prayer book, then away. He remembered what was inside. He did not ask to see it. "There is another matter. We should discuss the terms of this marriage before others presume to invent them." Her shoulders tightened despite herself. "Terms. Boundaries," he corrected. "Protections, Freedoms. Words are often traps in houses like ours. I prefer accurate ones. He gestured toward the adjoining study door, which stood open. Mrs. Thiel will remain within hearing in the corridor. The door will stay open. If you would rather speak here, we shall. He kept offering choices as if choice were not exhausting, as if it were a language he intended to teach the house on her behalf. The study is acceptable, she said. His study was darker than her morning room. All walnut shelves, ledgers, maps, and the faint smell of leather and ink. The silver Pentrith counter was not visible, and Leocadia was grateful. Aurelian waited until she chose a chair before taking the one opposite, not behind the desk. That, too, she understood. He would not make her petition across polished wood. First, he said, your rooms are yours. No one enters them without your permission except your maid, Mrs. Thiel, or a servant you approve. Even you, especially me. Heat rose beneath her skin, not from impropriety, but from the stark relief of the answer. He continued before she had to respond. Second, your correspondence is private. Third, you will have your own allowance, paid quarterly, with accounts shown to you and no one else unless you request assistance. Fourth, no caller is received unless you consent. Fifth, your father's requests are not household instructions. Sixth, Lord Cyprian is not admitted beyond the front hall without your approval. You have made a fortress, she said. No, his voice gentled only by a shade. Fortress keeps people in as effectively as out. I have made doors with locks on your side. She looked down at her hands. The ring was still unfamiliar. The man was still almost a stranger. Yet he had just described safety in a way no one in her life ever had. And the marriage itself, she asked. The words cost her something. He understood. His posture changed. Not dramatically, only enough to remove any impression of ease. You owe me no performance of affection. We will keep separate rooms. I will not come to yours unless invited, and I will not ask for what you do not freely wish to give. Society may claim rights over appearances. It has no right to your person. The quiet after that was almost unbearable. Leocadia had feared many things since Cyprian stepped away from her. She had not allowed herself to name that one. Aurelian had named it only to remove it. Thank you, she said, and disliked how small it sounded. Do not thank me for not taking what was never mine by entitlement. She looked at him then. He was cold, yes, but perhaps coldness had saved him from the lazy warmth with which other men excused themselves. I have one term, she said. Name it. Do not parade me before society as proof that your brother is dishonorable. I will not be used as a polished weapon in a family quarrel. Agreed. You agree very quickly, because the answer is obvious. Many obvious answers have not been offered to me. Something in his face tightened. Then I shall endeavor not to be many people. The words were formal. The feeling beneath them was not. For one moment, the open doorway, the waiting housekeeper, the ledgers, the scandal, and the ruined chapel seemed to fall away. Leocadia saw only a man who did not know how to be tender without making it sound like duty, and who was trying anyway. A soft knock spared them both from the intimacy of recognizing it. Mrs. Thiel appeared. Forgive me, Your Grace. A note has come from Lord Larkswell's man. The bearer insists it concerns urgent family business. Aurelian did not reach for it. Leocadia did. Her father's seal was pressed crookedly into the wax, a sign of haste or temper. She opened it, read 3 lines, and felt the old coldness return. He wishes to meet today about the disposition of my allowance, and whether it may properly assist obligations incurred before my marriage. His obligations, Aurelian said. He calls them family obligations. Greed often prefers a larger name. She folded the letter. I should answer, yes. Not you, not unless you ask me to. She thought of years spent smoothing her father's embarrassments into gentler shapes. Then she drew a sheet of paper from the desk. Her hand trembled only once. I will write that Her Grace is not available to discuss money today. Aurelian's mouth moved almost into approval. Excellent. And tomorrow Her Grace may be even less available. This time she did smile. It was small and it vanished quickly, but it had existed. Aurelian saw it. He looked away at once, as if granting the smile privacy. Later, when she returned to the morning room, the breakfast tray had been replaced. Not removed in silent criticism. Replaced, smaller this time. Tea, toast, pear slices, and one covered dish set near the window, rather than before the fire, where no one could stand over her. Mrs. Thiel said, His Grace thought your Grace might prefer something quieter. Leocadia stood very still after the housekeeper left. Quiet, not grand, not jeweled, not the sort of spoiling sung about in foolish drawing rooms. He had noticed that being watched stole hunger from her, and he had arranged the room so she could eat unseen. She sat by the window and took one bite of toast, then another. The food tasted of butter, salt, and the astonishing fact of being considered. On the desk, beside her prayer book, Lady Eudora's calling card remained unanswered. Beneath it, a folded gossip paragraph from the morning paper had been tucked by some unwise hand, claiming that the new Duchess had used a Pentrith messenger to summon Lord Cyprian from the altar and rise higher by his fall. Leocadia read it once. Her appetite vanished, but not her steadiness. The lie had found its shape. Somewhere in London, someone had decided. The crushed myrtle was not enough. They wanted her name crushed with it. The first week of Leocadia's marriage ended not with rest, but with an invitation whose cream paper seemed to carry perfume, judgment, and a challenge in equal measure. Almack's. The card lay on Aurelian's study desk beside the folded gossip paragraph she had found in her morning room. The one that claimed she had used a Pentrith messenger to draw Lord Cyprian from the altar like a woman, moving pieces on a board. Outside the windows, Mayfair gleamed beneath late afternoon sun, every brass knocker and carriage step polished bright enough to reflect reputations back at their owners. Inside, the room was still. Aurelian stood with one hand resting on the mantel, the other holding Lady Pentrith's note. Leocadia sat opposite him, wearing a dove-grey walking gown, because she had refused to put on mourning for a living humiliation. Her prayer book rested on the small table beside her. She had not opened it, but the bruised myrtle lay within, darkening slowly between its pages. You need not go, Aurelian said. I know. That was not a polite arrangement of words meant to guide you toward agreement. I mean it. Absence would not be cowardice tonight. No, she said, but it would be useful to them. His eyes lifted from the note. Lady Pentrith, Lady Pentrith, Lady Eudora, my father, anyone who prefers me silent, because silence can be filled with their version of events. She looked at the invitation. If I hide, the lie learns to stand without opposition. Aurelian watched her for a moment with that grave attention she had begun to recognize. It never wandered. It never softened into pity. It made her feel both seen and required to remain honest. You should understand what will happen, he said. They will not accuse you directly at first. They will phrase cruelty as concern. They will offer sympathy in tones designed to make listeners wonder whether sympathy is deserved. If you answer, some will call you defensive. If you do not answer, some will call you guilty. Then I shall choose the kind of discomfort I can respect. A slight pause, and what is that? The discomfort of speaking. He looked away first, not because he was indifferent, but because something in the answer had reached him. Very well, we attend. That evening, the carriage set them down before the assembly rooms under a sky fading from pearl to blue. Leocadia had chosen a gown of pale silver muslin, with no bridal white and no wounded softness. Mrs. Thiel had arranged her hair simply, with one narrow comb and no flowers. No myrtle tonight, the housekeeper had said carefully, and Leocadia had understood the kindness in it. Some symbols were not meant for rooms full of knives. The entrance hall shimmered with candles, polished floors, and the controlled movement of rank. Fans stirred. Jewels trembled at throats. Mothers angled daughters into paths of consequence. Conversations lowered, then rose again in a changed key as the Duke and Duchess of Wyntham entered. Leocadia felt the turn of every head as pressure against her skin. 2 weeks ago, she might have tried to become smaller beneath it. Tonight, she remembered crushed leaves in her palm and kept walking. Aurelian moved beside her, close enough to be unmistakably with her, far enough not to hurt her. That space mattered. It allowed the room to see that she was not being dragged into society for display. She had come standing on her own feet. Lady Jersey's greeting was cool but exact. A duchess could not be ignored without causing a greater scandal than acknowledging her. "Your Grace," the patroness said to Aurelian, then turned. "Your Grace," to Leocadia. The second title landed in the room like a small official bell. Leocadia curtsied with controlled grace. "Lady Jersey." They passed onward. The first half hour was made of small tests. A lady asked whether she found London overwhelming after such rapid changes. Leocadia replied that London had always excelled at rapid conclusions. A gentleman murmured that Lord Cyprian was not present. Aurelian answered, "No, one word, flat as a shut door." Then Lady Eudora Pentrith appeared near the refreshment table in blue silk, so pale it almost looked innocent. Her mother stood behind her, smiling with the serenity of a woman who believed sharp work should be done with clean gloves. Beside them lingered a narrow-faced footman in Pentrith livery, stationed near a tray, though he did not seem to be serving anyone. Leocadia noticed him because his eyes came to her and left too quickly. Aurelian noticed because Aurelian noticed everything. "Duchess," Eudora said, dipping into a curtsy just deep enough to satisfy rank and no deeper than pride allowed. "How brave of you to come, is it?" Leocadia asked. Eudora's smile held. "After so much confusion, I mean." Confusion is often a kinder word for other people's conduct. Lady Pentrith's fan moved once, a warning. A matron beside her, Lady Mervale, leaned forward with the bright expression of a woman delighted to be unwillingly informed. "My dear Duchess, surely no one blames you for accepting His Grace's protection. Still, one hears such strange things. A messenger summoned poor Lord Cyprian away, did he not? Some token from Pentrith House was mentioned. One wonders who could have given such an instruction." The nearby conversation died so gracefully that anyone not trained in society would have missed the murder. Leocadia felt the room lean in. There it was. Not yet the full accusation, only a ribbon of poison lowered into wine. Her mouth went dry. She thought of the breakfast tray by the window, of Aurelian setting her father's letters before her unopened, of the study door, left ajar because her safety mattered more than convenience. Those things did not speak for her. They gave her room to speak for herself. "One wonders a great many things, Lady Mervale," she said. "For instance, why a bride left before the vows would be treated as the person most likely to have arranged her own public disgrace. Eudora's eyes flashed. No one said disgrace, your grace. No one needed to. A faint rustle travelled through the ladies nearest them. Lady Pentreath's smile cooled. Surely you cannot object to questions. Society must protect itself from appearances. Then society should begin by looking at them carefully. Leocadia turned just enough that her words could reach the listeners beyond Lady Mervale. I stood before a chapel full of witnesses. Lord Cyprian stepped away. A message counter belonging to Pentreath House was found near the vestry. If I had wished to rise, as some generous imaginations suggest, why would I choose to be trampled first? Silence struck the room. Not complete, not theatrical, but enough. Even the musicians seemed to falter for half a measure before recovering. Lady Eudora's lips parted, then closed. The footman in Pentreath livery shifted. Aurelian's gaze moved to him, and stayed there for a single breath too long. Leocadia felt the force of it beside her. Then Aurelian moved, not forward to eclipse her, but slightly nearer. He lifted his right hand, palm open between them. It was not a command. It was not possession. It was an offer made in the sight of the room that had just tried to make her stand alone. She looked at his hand. Every lesson of propriety told her public contact mattered. Every wound of the past week told her accepting help might be mistaken for weakness. But his hand remained still, waiting, her choice. Leocadia placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed only enough to steady, not to claim. The sensation passed through her like a held breath finally released. Around them, society watched a gesture too proper to condemn and too intimate to dismiss. "Allow me to correct another appearance," Aurelian said, his voice carrying with the calm authority that made even titled men listen. "The Duchess of Wyntham is not under suspicion in my house. She is the only person in that chapel who answered dishonor with courage." Lady Mervale turned pink. Lady Pentreath's fan stilled. Eudora's composure held, but only because pride braced it from within. "Your loyalty is admirable," she said. "My accuracy is better." Aurelian looked at the footman again. "You there, your name." The man bowed awkwardly. "Mills, your grace, Mills," Aurelian repeated. "How fortunate. Mr. Holbury will wish to speak with you soon." The footman went pale before he could prevent it. Lady Pentreath intervened lightly. "My servant is hardly relevant to your domestic concerns." "Then he has nothing to fear from relevance." Aurelian turned away before she could answer, and because Leocadia's hand still rested in his, she turned with him. They moved through the room together, not fleeing, not triumphing, simply refusing to remain where cruelty expected them to bleed. Near the far end of the assembly room, beneath candles trembling in tall mirrors, he released her hand with the same care with which he had taken it. "Did I speak over you?" he asked quietly. The question undid her more than the defense had. "No." "Did I speak too soon?" "No." She looked back once. Eudora was speaking rapidly to her mother. Mills had disappeared from the refreshment table. The lie had not been killed, but it had been startled. "You spoke after I did," Leocadia said. "That is different." Aurelian inclined his head, and in the candlelight his severity seemed less like ice than discipline under strain. "Then I shall try to remember the difference." She believed him, not completely, not safely, but enough that when the music began again and the room pretended nothing had happened, her hand still remembered the shape of his, open and waiting, in front of everyone. The morning after Almack's, Bexley House seemed to breathe differently. Not easily, not yet, but as if some window within its walls had been opened a hand's width to let in air. The newspapers still arrived, folded like threats. Calling cards still gathered on silver trays. Somewhere in London, Lady Pentrith was certainly arranging pity into a weapon, and Lady Eudora was teaching outrage to wear lace. Yet in the Duchess's morning room, the fire was gentle. The breakfast tray stood near the window where no one watched over it, and Lady Leocadia Wyntham found herself eating 2 slices of pear before she remembered to be astonished by hunger. Aurelian had not joined her. He never presumed upon her mornings. That absence had become its own form of courtesy. On the desk beside her lay the prayer book, with the bruised myrtle pressed inside, and beside it a folded note from Lord Septimus, delivered at an hour early enough to be called concern by anyone determined to be charitable. Leocadia did not need to open it to know its tone. Family, duty, gratitude, money. Her father's words wore different coats, but they always walked toward the same door. She broke the seal anyway. A duchess could not learn strength by refusing to look at what wished to bend her. By the 3rd line, she felt the old coldness at the back of her throat. By the 5th, she felt something newer, anger, perhaps, or the first healthy shape of it. Lord Septimus reminded her that Larkswell obligations predated her sudden elevation, that family honor did not vanish because a daughter changed houses, and that a small advance from her allowance might prevent regrettable public embarrassment. He did not say whose embarrassment. He assumed she would know. She did. She folded the letter once, precisely, and was reaching for a clean sheet when Mrs. Thiel appeared at the door. His Grace asks whether your Grace would permit him 10 minutes in the morning room. Leocadia looked at the tray, at her father's folded demand, then at the housekeeper's careful face. Yes, and Mrs. Thiel, your Grace, please leave the door open. Something like approval moved behind the housekeeper's eyes. Of course, your Grace. Aurelian entered a moment later, carrying no newspaper and wearing no expression that might force hers into defense. His gaze went first to her face, then to the opened letter, then to the tray, where half the breakfast had actually been eaten. He said nothing about that. The omission warmed her more than praise would have done. Your father has written again, he said. My father has discovered the speed of the post when money answers at the other end. Aurelian's mouth almost changed. Almost. May I know the substance? He wishes me to assist old family, obligations from my allowance. His debts. He did not use the word. Men rarely name the appetite they hope a woman will feed. She looked up. There was no flourish in his voice, no dramatic condemnation. Only recognition, clean and unsentimental. You speak as if you have seen it often. I have seen Cyprian forgiven with coin until forgiveness became another debt. I have seen families preserve appearance by spending the quietest woman in the room. He paused near the chair opposite hers, but did not sit. May I? She nodded. He sat, not too near the desk, not too far. I failed to see how close my brother was to collapse. That failure injured you. The directness stole her prepared answer. She had expected strategy. She had not expected confession. You did not make him step away from me. No, but I mistook management for prevention. It is a common ducal vanity. That sounds almost like a joke. It is not. I am poor at jokes. This time, she did smile, and this time he did not look away quickly enough to hide that he had seen it and treasured the sight before discipline reclaimed him. The moment was small. It was also dangerous. Leocadia lowered her eyes to the letter. I want to answer him myself. Good. You do not know what I intend to say. I know it will be yours. She touched the edge of the paper. That is a reckless amount of faith for a man who considers everything evidence. Not reckless. Recent evidence supports it. She should not have felt pleased. She did. The feeling unsettled her, so she opened the prayer book instead, careful with the cracked spine. The myrtle lay between the pages, flattened and dark at the bruised edges, yet still faintly fragrant when the air reached it. Aurelian's gaze sharpened, not with curiosity alone, but with memory. "My mother grew myrtle," Leocadia said, before she could decide whether she meant to. At Larkswell Court, not grandly, there was a little chapel garden behind the south wall, where the wind did not break the stems. She said, brides carried myrtle because it promised love, but she preferred it because it survived poor soil if given patience. Aurelian remained still. The room seemed to bend around his listening. After she died, my father dismissed the gardener's boy who tended it. The bed went wild, then dry. I was told there were larger matters to consider. Her thumb rested near the bruised sprig, but not upon it. There are always larger matters when a woman's grief is inconvenient. For a while, he said nothing. She had learned that his silences were not empty. They gathered weight before becoming action. "Would restoring such a garden comfort you?" he asked. "Or would it pain you?" The question was so carefully made that she had to look at him. He did not say he would restore it. He did not seize the memory and turn it into a ducal gesture before learning whether she wanted it touched. "At Larkswell?" she asked. "No, I would not send workmen into your father's chapel garden without your wish. I meant Wyntham. There is an old chapel bed there, I am told, though I have neglected it. You? I have neglected many things that did not send accounts to my desk." The admission held no self-pity. That made it more honest. Leocadia looked down at the myrtle. "Crushed, yes, but not dust. I think," she said slowly, "it would comfort me to know something was being planted, where no one wished to. Use it as proof of anything. Then I shall write to the head gardener. Not because I am sad. No," his voice was low, "because you remembered life in a place where others remembered only debt." Her throat tightened. She closed the prayer book before emotion could spill into the room and make a spectacle of the quiet. "You have a way of making kindness sound like an instruction to a steward. That may be the only way I know how to begin." Begin. The words stayed between them after it was spoken. Neither reached for it. Neither turned from it. The open door, the waiting housekeeper somewhere beyond, the hard rules of propriety, all of them held the room in its proper shape. Yet something had shifted. Not a confession, not affection declared, a small root feeling for soil. A knock came before either could speak again. Mrs. Thiel entered with a folded memorandum on a tray. "From Mr. Holbury, Your Grace," marked immediate. Aurelian opened it, read, and the stillness that followed was not tender. It was dangerous. "What has happened?" Leocadia asked. He handed her the memorandum without delay. The gesture mattered. She read the neat legal hand. A debt bond folio connected to Lord Cyprian had been traced through a gaming acquaintance known to attend dinners at Lady Pentrith's brother's house. One signature was Cyprian's. Another mark suggested a guarantor connected to Larkswell obligations. Her father's letter seemed suddenly to darken beside her hand. "So my father's debts and Cyprian's may have crossed the same table," she said. "It is possible, and Lady Pentrith's circle knew? Likely. Likely is not proof. No." He looked almost grimly pleased by her precision. "It is direction." She stood and walked to the window, because sitting still had begun to feel too much like waiting. In the street below, a flower girl passed with a basket of violets. A carriage rolled by, its curtains closed against curiosity. London moved as if private lives were not being broken and rebuilt behind walls. "They will not stop," she said. "No, Lady Eudora will not let the question remain at Almack's. No. Then we must go where the next lie is spoken." Aurelian's gaze fixed on her. "There is an invitation from Lady Pentrith for a supper in 3 days. I had intended to refuse it. Because it is a trap. Because it is a trap." Then refusing gives her an empty chair and a full room. She turned back to him. "I am tired of empty chairs being used to speak for me." Something in his face changed, more visible than before. Respect, yes, concern too, but beneath both, a kind of reluctant wonder, as if he had expected dignity and found courage sharpening itself in plain sight. "You should not have to fight every room." "I know." She picked up her father's letter and placed it beside Mr. Holbury's memorandum. "But if rooms are where they ruin women, then rooms are where some women must learn to remain standing." He rose. "Then we attend Lady Pentrith's supper, together?" "If you permit it." She held his gaze. "I do." The words were simple, but they entered the room differently from agreement. He bowed his head once, and for a moment the Duke of Wyntham looked less like a man arranging defences and more like one making a vow he did not yet know how to speak. When he left to write to the head gardener at Wyntham and send instructions to Mr. Holbury, Leocadia remained by the desk. She opened a fresh sheet and answered her father in her own hand. Her Grace was not available to pay old debts disguised as family honour. Her Grace would not discuss her allowance as if it were a public trough. Her Grace remained, despite every expectation, very much able to write for herself. She sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it. Then she touched the prayer book once, lightly. Somewhere in Kent, a neglected chapel bed would be cleared, because a cold man had remembered a crushed woman's myrtle. And somewhere in Mayfair, Lady Pentrith was preparing another room to wound her. This time, Leocadia intended to enter it awake. Lady Pentrith's supper began with candlelight polished to a level of cruelty. Every sconce in her Mayfair dining room had been trimmed so that faces appeared clear and floors had nowhere to hide. Silver branches of wax candles stood between porcelain dishes. White lilies, cut glass, and fruit arranged too perfectly to suggest appetite. It was not a meal. It was a stage with soup. Lady Leocadia Wyntham understood that the moment she crossed the threshold on Aurelian's arm and saw how conversation thinned, then rearranged itself around her. 3 weeks had passed since the chapel, yet society still looked at her as if the crushed myrtle were beneath her shoe instead of Cyprian's. Lady Eudora Pentrith stood near the fireplace in pale green silk, the colour of new leaves and old venom. The shade was deliberate. Leocadia knew it before Eudora smiled. "Your Grace," Eudora said, lowering herself into a curtsy smooth enough to be admired and shallow enough to insult. "How generous of you to come." "I was invited," Leocadia answered. "Generosity belongs to those who make room honestly." Eudora's smile tightened by a thread. Aurelian's hand rested lightly beneath Leocadia's fingers, formal at her side. He did not speak. That silence had become one of the few things in London she trusted. He would not answer before she chose whether to answer. Across the room, Lady Pentrith welcomed them with the practiced warmth of a hostess who had sharpened every word before the guests arrived. Lord Septimus was present too, which Leocadia had not known until she saw him beside a cabinet of blue china. He looked both relieved and anxious, a man invited to dine where his debts might be forgiven if only his daughter behaved usefully. Her stomach lowered. Aurelian's gaze followed hers. "We may leave," he murmured. Not yet. No pride requires you to remain. It isn't pride. She looked toward the long table where places had been arranged with exact intention. It's evidence. His eyes shifted to hers. For a moment, amid candles, silk, and hostile elegance, something almost like warmth moved between them. Then Lady Pentreath clapped her hands softly. Shall we dine? The first course was served with such ceremony that the room could pretend nothing vulgar as accusation would ever occur there. Soups, fish, a discussion of the weather in Kent, a remark about the Prince Regent's taste in furnishings. Under it all, Leocadia felt the trap being assembled piece by piece. The Pentreath footman, Mills, served near the sideboard. She recognized him from Almack's. His face was pale, his movements careful, and he avoided looking toward the Duke. Aurelian noticed without seeming to. At Leocadia's left, Lady Mervale leaned close enough for perfume to become a weapon. I must say, Your Grace, you bear scrutiny very gracefully. It is a skill women are taught early. How very clever. Not clever. Necessary. Lady Mervale's eyes glittered. Still, one hopes necessity does not become habit. Before Leocadia could answer, Lady Pentreath rose at the head of the table with a folded paper in one hand and a small silver object in the other. The room obediently quieted. Leocadia felt Aurelian become absolutely still beside her. He had not expected this precise arrangement. That told her the attack was not merely gossip. It was prepared theatre. My friends, Lady Pentreath said, in a voice soft enough to make interruption appear rude. I had hoped this evening would soothe a matter that has distressed many connected families. No one wishes to prolong uncertainty. Least of all those of us whose household has been mentioned in connection with an unfortunate chapel incident. She held up the silver counter, not the one Aurelian had recovered. That one remained in his possession. Then Mr. Holbury's record. This was another Pentreath counter, clean and gleaming, shown as demonstration. Such tokens are used in my house for trusted errands. They are not mysterious. They are not sinister. They are household order. Eudora lowered her eyes with injured modesty. Lord Septimus looked at Leocadia, warning already alive in his face. Lady Pentreath turned toward Mills. Mills, you may speak plainly. No one here will punish honesty. The footman swallowed. His hands gripped the back of a chair. Yes, my lady. Did you, on the morning of the interrupted wedding, receive instruction to attend the chapel vestry? Yes, my lady. The room leaned forward. Leocadia felt the floor vanish and remain beneath her at the same time. From whom did the instruction come? Mills lifted his eyes at last. They fixed on Leocadia with the misery of a man stepping into a lie he could not afford to refuse. From her Grace, Lady Leocadia, as was then. The silence did not fall. It struck. Lord Septimus closed his eyes briefly. Lady Mervale inhaled. Eudora's face did not change, which was how Leocadia knew she had been waiting for this exact wound. Aurelian's hand moved on the table, not toward Mills, not toward Lady Pentreath, but nearer Leocadia's. He did not touch her. Not there. Not without asking. That restraint kept her from breaking. Lady Pentreath's voice trembled with false sorrow. You are certain? Mills's jaw worked. She gave me the counter and told me Lord Cyprian must be fetched away before the vows. Said there was a matter he must know. What matter? Aurelian asked. His voice was calm enough to frighten. Mills blanched. I don't know, Your Grace. Convenient. Lady Pentreath stiffened. Your Grace, the man is frightened. He should be. Leocadia rose before Aurelian could say more. The chair legs made the smallest sound against the carpet, yet it seemed louder than all the whispers in London. Her hands were cold. Her heart beat so hard she thought the room might see it in her throat. She had been accused before dinner, before gentry, before her father, before the woman who had watched her posy crushed. The old Leocadia might have tried to explain quickly enough to be believed. The Duchess of Wyntham had learned something different. She let the silence ripen. If I had wished to rise, she said, and her voice, to her wonder, did not shake. Why would I choose to be trampled first? No one answered. She turned to Mills. You say I gave you a counter. Yes, Your Grace. Where? In the vestry passage. Before the ceremony? Yes. Then you saw me leave the chapel before I walked down the aisle. Mills's mouth opened. Closed. A murmur stirred. Lady Pentreath intervened. A distressed bride might have stepped aside unseen. In full dress, with veil, attendants, and half the chapel watching for delay, Leocadia turned toward the table. My arrival was remarked upon by nearly every person present, because Lord Cyprian had not yet arrived. I was not in the vestry passage. Eudora spoke then, sweetly. Memory becomes uncertain under shock. Then it is fortunate I am not relying on memory alone. For the first time, Leocadia looked to Aurelian, not for rescue, for witness. His eyes held hers, steady and dark. The original counter, he said, was found near the vestry step after my brother fled. It is not in this room. It is held for examination by Mr. Holbury. No duplicate displayed at supper alters that fact. Lady Pentreath's smile thinned. A duke's solicitor is not the court of God. No, Aurelian said, but he is less easily entertained by theatrics. Leocadia should not have wanted to smile. She nearly did. Lady Pentreath struck again. The question remains, why would my servant name the Duchess if he had no cause? That, Leocadia said, is the first useful question asked tonight. She looked at Mills, and in his frightened face she saw not only guilt, but fear with a human shape. Who holds your fear, Mills? His lips trembled. Lady Pentreath snapped. Enough, Aurelian stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Her Grace has been accused beneath your roof, Lady Pentreath. She will not be silenced beneath it. The room went cold. Leocadia felt the attack had not ended. It had only changed form. Aurelian offered his arm, but she shook her head once. Not rejection, not yet. She needed to walk out on her own strength. He understood and walked beside her without touching. Only when they reached the carriage and the door closed against the street did the shaking begin. It came all at once, through her hands first, then her breath. Bexley House received them in controlled alarm. Aurelian did not take her to his study. He guided her at her nod to the drawing-room where the door could remain open, and Mrs. Thiel's presence in the corridor preserved every boundary. Leocadia stood near the fireplace, still wearing her gloves, hating the tremor in her fingers. They will say I ran, she said. They will say many things, and the useful ones, those, we will collect. He moved to the chair opposite her, then stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand palm up between them. Not command, not claim. An offer. May I sit with you? The question nearly undid her. She nodded. He sat, leaving space. His hand remained open on the small table between them. Leocadia looked at it for a long moment. She had taken that hand at Almack's before the room. Tonight felt different. Less display. More decision. She placed her gloved hand in his and kept it there. His fingers closed gently, not enough to trap, only enough to answer. The trembling eased, not because the danger had passed, but because she was no longer holding herself together alone. You may withdraw to Wyntham tomorrow, he said. No one would call it defeat in my hearing. That is not the same as no one calling it defeat. No. Or I may stay, yes. And fight? His thumb did not move over her glove. He gave even comfort a boundary, if you choose it. She looked toward the dark window, where candlelight reflected them faintly side by side. Then I choose it. Aurelian's grip warmed, steady and careful. Then we fight properly. With evidence, with evidence. She breathed once more deeply, and with the truth, his gaze held hers, especially that. Outside, London carried the supper's poison into waiting carriages. Inside, Leocadia kept her hand in her husband's and understood that belief, offered before proof was safe, could be more intimate than any vow spoken at an altar. By the 4th week of her marriage, Leocadia had learned that a lie did not need to be believed by everyone. In order to wound effectively, it needed only to be repeated by the right mouths in the right rooms, with enough lace around it to look like concern. The morning after Lady Pentrith's supper, 3 callers sent regrets to Bexley House before Leocadia had even considered receiving them. By noon, a note arrived from a patroness who had previously praised her composure, now expressing hope that her Grace would not find public life too fatiguing after recent agitation. By afternoon, Lord Septimus wrote that she must not provoke further speculation, and that a private family understanding would serve everyone better than public defiance. Leocadia read that letter standing beside the window of her morning room, the grey London light turning the paper almost blue in her hands. Public defiance. That was what her father called a woman, refusing to let a lie sit comfortably upon her name. She folded the letter and placed it beneath the smaller paper Mr. Holbury had sent an hour earlier. The solicitor's note was precise and troubling. A debt bond folio tied to Lord Cyprian had indeed passed through a creditor connected to Lady Pentrith's brother, but one endorsement suggested obligations near Larkswell as well. Her father's world and Cyprian's had not merely brushed against each other. They had met in ink, signatures, and need. In the study below, Aurelian was already at work. Leocadia knew because Bexley House changed its rhythm when the Duke was angry. Footmen moved faster. Doors closed more softly. Messengers entered and departed through the side passage with the discretion of men carrying consequence in sealed packets. She waited for him to send for her. He did not. At first, the restraint comforted her. Then, as morning became afternoon, it began to feel less like respect and more like distance wearing his coat. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Thiel brought tea and, after a hesitation, added, "His Grace is meeting Mr. Holbury in the library, Your Grace." Lord Larkswell's name was mentioned. Leocadia set down her cup untouched. Was it? The housekeeper lowered her eyes. "I thought Your Grace should know that a gentleman from Threadneedle Street was shown in by the side door. A creditor, then, or someone who knew how creditors spoke." Leocadia stood. "Thank you, Mrs. Thiel. Shall I send word to His Grace? No, I believe I shall send myself." The library door was not fully closed when she reached it. That spared everyone the pretense that she had not heard Aurelian's voice inside. "No private settlement is to be concluded until I know whether Lord Larkswell's obligation can be separated from Cyprian's bond." Mr. Holbury answered in his mild legal tone, "Your Grace, separation may be difficult. If the Earl's exposure becomes known, Her Grace will be injured by association. That is precisely what I intend to prevent." There was a pause. Papers shifted. "By containing it." The word went through Leocadia like a blade made of ice. Containing. She opened the door. Both men turned. Mr. Holbury rose at once. Aurelian rose more slowly, and the stillness in his face told her he understood his error before she had named it. On the long library table lay several documents, a creditor's memorandum, and one brown folio tied with black tape. Leocadia did not touch it. Not yet. Containing what, Your Grace? She asked. Aurelian's jaw tightened. A matter that may harm you unnecessarily. I was harmed publicly. It seems the unnecessary part has already been spent, Mr. Hulbury looked down at the papers as if hoping the table might swallow him. Aurelian did not dismiss him. That, at least, was to his credit. Lord Larkswell's name appears near Cyprian's debt route, he said. Not as primary debtor, as connected obligation. I did not want Lady Pentrith to use your father's weakness to stain you further, so you learned how much of the stain could be hidden. I arranged to learn whether a private payment could prevent a public weapon. A private payment made by whom? Silence. She almost laughed. The sound would have hurt too much, so she kept it in. By you, if necessary. For my sake, yes, without asking whether I wished my father's debts brought into silence. The words left her quietly. Their quietness did more damage than anger could have done. Aurelian's expression did not soften. It altered into something worse. Recognition. Leocadia. It was the first time he had used her name without title in front of another person. Under different circumstances, it might have moved her. Now it only made the room feel smaller. Do not, she said. Don't make my name sound like an apology before you've offered one. Mr. Hulbury went very still. Aurelian accepted the blow. You are right. Not enough. He drew in a breath, controlled, measured, miserable in a way only a disciplined man could be miserable. Not enough, he agreed. She looked at the brown folio. What else do you know? The Pentrith counter used at the chapel was signed out before the wedding. Mr. Hulbury is attempting to obtain the household record. Mills's testimony at supper was almost certainly coerced. Almost. Yes. Then I will find someone who knows. Aurelian's head lifted. Who, Mrs. Valey? She was once companion to Lady Pentrith's elder sister. My mother knew her a little. She lives near the Bloomsbury Edge now, respectably enough. And if Lady Pentrith's house uses message counters as regularly as she claims, a former companion may know who was permitted to command them. Mr. Hulbury looked impressed despite himself. That is a sensible line of inquiry, Your Grace. I am relieved my reputation has not made me foolish. Aurelian flinched almost imperceptibly. She regretted the sharpness and refused to take it back. Pain did not become false because it was expressed with precision. You will not go alone, he said. No, my maid will attend me. So will your aunt, if she is willing. The visit will be proper, visible, and mine. He stepped around the table, stopping well beyond any reach that might have become pressure. I will arrange the carriage. You may offer it. I offer it, and the footman, those you choose from Mrs. Thiel's recommendation. And the papers? He glanced at the folio, then back to her. They will be locked until you return, unless you wish them moved to your keeping now. It was the correct answer. It did not heal the hurt, but it marked the place where healing might begin later. Keep them with Mr. Hulbury for now. Record every hand that touches them. Done. For a moment, neither spoke. The room was full of ledgers, rank, error, and the strange ache of a trust bruised before it had fully formed. Leocadia turned to leave, then paused. His cravat had been slightly disturbed, likely from a hand dragged against his throat during hours of thought. The imperfection should not have mattered. It did. This severe, careful man had erred because he feared the world would find another way to injure her. That did not excuse him. It made the wound complicated. She stepped back toward him, his eyes lowered to her hand as she lifted it. But, He did not move. He did not even breathe as she straightened the white linen at his throat with 2 brief touches of her gloved fingers. The intimacy of it shocked them both. It was not forgiveness. It was not surrender. It was a reminder that she could be hurt and still choose the shape of her own tenderness. "Do not hide my life from me and call it mercy," she said. His voice was low. "I won't. Say it properly. I won't hide your life from you and call it mercy." She let her hand fall. "Then I will return with whatever truth Mrs. Vaylley is willing to give." 2 hours later, Leocadia rode through London in a plain Bexley carriage with her maid opposite, and Lady Aurelia Bexley. Beside her, a formidable widowed aunt whose silver hair and sharper eyes made even crossing sweeps stand aside faster. Mrs. Vaylley received them in a modest drawing-room, where the furniture had been mended carefully, and the tea was too weak to pretend prosperity. She was a thin woman with intelligent hands, and the cautious manner of someone who had once survived great houses by hearing everything and repeating very little. At the mention of Pentrith message counters, her face changed. "They were kept in a locked tray near the steward's desk," she said. "Lady Pentrith used them for errands she did not wish entered as formal correspondence." "Could Lady Eudora command one?" Leocadia asked. Mrs. Vaylley hesitated. Lady Aurelia leaned forward. "Madam, the Duchess was accused before witnesses." The older woman's mouth tightened. "Then yes, Lady Eudora borrowed them often, especially when she wished a servant to obey without asking whether her mother had approved. And Mills? Mills has a sister in a cottage at Pentrith expense, or had. Such cottages teach loyalty more effectively than affection." Leocadia felt the last piece settle not into place, but within reach. Not proof yet. Direction. Human fear given address and rent. She thanked Mrs. Vaylley, and left with a written statement promised for the next morning. As the carriage turned back toward Grosvenor Square, the city lamps began to glow through the dusk. Leocadia looked down at the glove that had touched Aurelian's cravat, and curled her fingers once, remembering his stillness, his error, and the way he had repeated her words when she demanded it. The trust between them had not broken. It had been tested and found unfinished. That was not failure, not yet. But when she returned to Bexley House, she intended to place the next piece of truth on the table herself. Leocadia returned to Bexley House at dusk with Mrs. Vaylley's promised statement not yet in hand, but with something almost as valuable. Direction sharpened into certainty. The carriage lamps had only just been lit along Grosvenor Square, and the air carried that blue London chill which made stone houses look colder than they were. She entered through the front hall with Lady Aurelia Bexley at her side, and found Aurelian waiting below the staircase, not in the grand attitude of a duke receiving reports, but as a man who had been listening for wheels. His gaze went first to her face, then to her hands, then to the space behind her, making certain no distress had followed visibly through the door. "Mrs. Vaylley will write by morning," Leocadia said before he could ask. "Lady Eudora could command Pentrith counters. Mills has a sister, whose cottage is paid for by Lady Pentrith's steward." Aurelian's expression did not change, but the hall seemed to tighten around the information. "Then fear has a rent receipt." "So it appears." Lady Aurelia removed her gloves with brisk satisfaction. "The former companion is frightened, but not foolish. Send Mr. Holbury early and kindly. Frightened women tell more truth to men who do not arrive as punishment." Aurelian bowed. "I will." Lady Aurelia looked between them, saw more than either wished her to see, and announced that she required tea strong enough to revive civilization. Mrs. Thiel led her away. Leocadia remained in the hall, suddenly aware of the whole day pressing against her bones. Aurelian took one step closer, then stopped before proximity became presumption. "Will you speak with me?" he asked. "Not in the library." His eyes darkened with understanding. "No, not there. The conservatory," she said. "The door may remain open to the passage, as you wish." The conservatory at the back of Bexley House held ferns, orange trees in tubs, and panes of glass clouded by evening mist. It was neither public nor intimate enough to be dangerous, especially with the door left open, and Mrs. Thiel's occasional movement audible beyond. The last of the day lay in silver streaks across the tiled floor. Leocadia stood beside a camellia that had not yet flowered. Aurelian entered and closed nothing behind him. For a moment he was silent. She could see the effort it cost him not to begin with explanation. He was a man trained to solve before suffering could accuse him. "I was wrong," he said at last. No preface, no defense. The words entered the room cleanly. Leocadia's fingers tightened around the ribbon of her reticule. "Yes, I told myself I meant to spare you. That was the shape of the error, not its excuse. I began to arrange the evidence as if your reputation were a matter I could settle safely with men at a table. I treated your public injury as a private problem of management." He drew a breath, and for the first time since she had known him, his composure did not fully hide what lay beneath it. "I did what your father has done, though with better manners and better intentions. That may make it quieter. It does not make it clean." Her throat tightened despite all her resolve. "You understood that before I returned. I understood it when you touched my cravat and told me not to hide your life from you. I understood it more while you were gone. I should have understood it before you had to teach me." The humility was not decorative. It did not ask to be admired. That was why it hurt. "And now," she asked, "now every document Mr. Halberry holds will be copied for you. No settlement, inquiry, payment, interview, or confrontation will happen without your knowledge and authorization. If you wish the matter private, I will keep it private. If you wish it public, I will stand where the room cannot pretend you stand alone. If you wish to leave London for Wyntham tonight, I will arrange it. If you wish me to leave you in peace, I will do that too. And if I cannot forgive you yet," his face tightened, but he did not look away, "then I will remain accountable without payment." That steadied her more than a plea would have done. Outside the glass, the garden shadows thickened. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck the half-hour. Leocadia thought of her father's letter, Mills's frightened mouth, Lady Eudora's green silk, Cyprian vanishing from a chapel and leaving her to answer for his cowardice. Then she thought of this man, severe and imperfect, offering her not a polished apology, but the weapon she had needed all her life, authority over her own truth. "Public shame requires public correction," she said. "Not gossip against gossip. Proof, witnesses, names spoken where the lie was born." "The chapel?" he asked. She felt the word like a chill and a summons. "The vestry. The place where the counter was found. The place where I was first made into a question." Aurelian bowed his head once, then the vestry. She looked at him then and saw the cost of his agreement. It would expose Cyprian. It might expose Lord Septimus. It would drag House Bexley, House Harrowden, and House Pentrith into a formal scandal no polite supper could perfume away. Yet he did not ask her to soften it. "You will not speak for me first," she said. "No. You will not decide which truth is too painful for me. No, you will not turn my vindication into your generosity." His voice lowered. "Never." The word broke something in her, not violently, but like a locked window, finally giving under careful hands. She stepped forward before she could lose courage. Aurelian went utterly still. Leocadia placed her forehead against the front of his coat, just below the shoulder, and let the tremor she had been carrying since Lady Pentrith's supper pass through her once. He did not touch her, not at first. He waited so completely that the waiting itself became tenderness. She could hear his breath stop, then return with discipline. Her hands rested lightly against the dark cloth, neither gripping nor retreating. "You may hold me," she said, the words almost too quiet for the ferns to hear. His arms came around her slowly, carefully, leaving her every chance to step away. She did not. The embrace was not passionate. It was more dangerous than that. It was safe. For several breaths, Leocadia allowed herself to be neither daughter, nor scandal, nor duchess displayed before knives. She was simply a woman held by a man who had hurt her and chosen to name the wound correctly. When she drew back, he released her at once. His eyes were not cold now. They were dark, with restraint, remorse, and something unspoken that neither of them was ready to place in the room. Before either could move further into that silence, a hurried footsteps sounded in the passage. Mr. Holbury appeared at the open door, hat in hand, looking as close to alarm as his profession allowed. "Forgive the intrusion, your graces." Aurelian turned, all ducal severity restored, though Leocadia could still feel the warmth of his arms as a private fact beneath the moment. "Speak. Lord Cyprian has been found at rooms off St. James's Street. He has admitted, not formally, but before my clerk and Mr. Bexley's own valet, that Lady Eudora Pentrith promised to ease his debt if he left the chapel before the vows." Leocadia's hand went to the edge of the plant stand to steady herself. Aurelian looked at her before answering, asking without words whether she wished the report continued. She nodded. Mr. Holbury unfolded a paper. "He claims he was told her grace would be ruined, quietly, that his grace would have no choice but to withdraw from association, and that Lady Eudora would be presented afterward as a suitable, unblemished alliance. He also says the Pentrith footman was instructed to make the summons appear connected to the bride if any question arose." The room seemed to tilt, then settle into a new and terrible clarity. It was not only cowardice, it had been design. Not merely abandonment, but attempted replacement. Leocadia heard herself ask, "Will Cyprian say this publicly?" Mr. Holbury hesitated. At present, he is ashamed, frightened, and inclined to preserve himself. "Then he is unchanged," Aurelian said. His voice carried ice enough to frost the glass. Mr. Holbury inclined his head. "There is more. Among the papers recovered from his rooms is a note referring to the debt folio. The covering entry appears to correspond with the chapel vestry attendant's slip. I have sent for the chaplain's copy." Leocadia looked toward the dark garden beyond the conservatory. The path ahead was no longer fog. It was stone, hard and narrow, leading back to the room where her name had first been left bleeding. "Send for Mrs. Valey in the morning," she said. "Kindly, as Lady Aurelia advised. Send for Mills before Lady Pentrith can send him away, and tell Lord Cyprian that if shame could silence him, it should have done so before he reached the altar." Mr. Holbury blinked. Aurelian did not. He looked at her as if the whole meaning of courage had just altered before him. "Yes, your grace," the solicitor said. When he withdrew, the conservatory settled again, around leaves, glass, and gathering night. Aurelian stood beside Leocadia, close, but not touching now, as if the embrace had not granted him any future right he had not already asked for. That more than anything, made her turn to him. "I have not forgiven everything," she said. "I know, but I am no longer alone inside it." His voice softened until only she could hear. "No, you are not." She thought of the crushed myrtle in her prayer book, darkened but not yet discarded. Somewhere at Wyntham, a gardener would soon clear soil for roots that did not exist yet. Here in London, proof was beginning to root as well, hidden beneath fear, debt, and pride. Leocadia drew one steady breath. "Then we prepare the vestry." Aurelian inclined his head. "Together." By morning, the evidence no longer looked like scattered injuries. It had become a path. Mr. Hulbury arranged it across the long table in Aurelian's library, with the care of a man who understood that truth, if handled clumsily, could be made to look like another accusation. The original Pentrith silver message counter lay on a square of dark velvet, duller now than it had appeared beneath chapel candles, but no less damning. Beside it rested the copied sign-out entry from Pentrith House, obtained through a steward who had suddenly discovered the wisdom of remembering dates when faced with a duke's solicitor. The entry showed that a counter had been taken out hours before the interrupted wedding by Miss Garth, Lady Eudora's maid. Next came the chapel vestry attendance slip, Mr. Ardent's careful record confirming that Mills, a Pentrith footman, had entered the vestry passage before the ceremony. Then the debt bond folio, Cyprian's signature obvious even to Leocadia's untrained eye, because vanity had made his handwriting large, slanted, and impossible to mistake. A rent receipt for Mills's sister lay folded beneath it, paid through Lady Pentrith's steward. Last, in Mrs. Valley's neat hand, came the statement that Lady Eudora had often commanded household counters for private errands, and that servants understood such commands as carrying the authority of the house. Leocadia stood at the edge of the table with her prayer book clasped in both hands. Inside it, the crushed myrtle had darkened nearly black around the broken leaves. It was not evidence. She knew that. Still, it was the only object in the room that remembered pain before it became proof. Aurelian stood opposite her, not behind the documents, not at the head of the table, but where he could meet her eyes across them. That placement had been deliberate. She recognized it now. He had stopped arranging rooms so they bent toward him. "Mr. Hulbury," she said, "if Lady Pentrith claims these records were altered after the fact, the chapel slip is in Mr. Ardent's own register, Your Grace, he will testify. The Pentrith sign-out page bears 3 consecutive household entries before and after the counter-entry. Altering it would require altering the whole day's service record." "And Mills?" Mr. Hulbury's expression became more careful. "He is frightened, but his sister's cottage is indeed held at Lady Pentrith's pleasure. He now admits he lied at supper because he feared losing it. Will he say that in the vestry? If his grace guarantees the sister will not be cast out before midsummer?" Aurelian answered at once. "She will have a cottage on Bexley land if Pentrith turns her out." Leocadia looked at him. Without requiring Mills to embellish, his gaze did not flinch. Without requiring anything beyond the truth, she nodded. A small correction, a necessary one. He had not bristled. That mattered more than she wished to admit. Mr. Hulbury continued. "Lord Cyprian remains the weakest link. He admits privately that Lady Eudora promised relief if he fled, but he fears public disgrace." "He feared disgrace after abandoning a bride before witnesses?" Leocadia asked. "Fear is not known for arranging itself logically, Your Grace." "No, it is known for arranging itself conveniently." Aurelian's mouth tightened, but he did not soften Cyprian for her. "I will bring him." Leocadia set the prayer book on the table. No, you will require his attendance. I will ask the first question. Mr. Holbury lowered his eyes, perhaps to hide approval. Aurelian held her gaze for a long moment. Yes, the answer came without struggle. That too mattered. The arrangements were completed by noon. Mr. Ardent agreed to open the vestry the following morning, with selected witnesses from the original ceremony. Lady Pentreath and Lady Eudora were summoned in language too formal to refuse without confessing alarm. Lord Septimus sent one furious note demanding that family matters not be dragged before servants and tradesmen. Leocadia answered with a single line. Public shame had taught her the value of witnesses. By late afternoon, the library had emptied of solicitors, clerks, and messengers. Rain began against the windows, soft at first, then steady enough to blur Grosvenor Square into grey glass and black branches. Leocadia remained near the evidence table while Aurelian sealed the final packet. You are tired, he said. Yes, we can delay one day. No, his hand paused over the wax. I said we can, not that we should. She looked at him, and the old fear that he might try to spare her by moving the pain out of sight did not rise as sharply as before. I know. He set down the seal. Tomorrow will be cruel. Tomorrow will be accurate. Those are not opposites. No, but I have survived cruelty without accuracy. I would like to try the other arrangement. His face changed. Not dramatically. Aurelian's emotions did not arrive like storms. They moved like deep water beneath ice, visible only where the surface strained. I have wanted to keep you from that room, he said. I know. This morning, when Mr. Ardent confirmed the witnesses, I nearly instructed him that you should enter after the evidence was laid out. Her breath caught. And then I heard your voice before I heard my own. You would have said, don't make the room ready for me, as if I'm another object to be placed. The imitation was too solemn to be amusing, yet she almost smiled. I might have said it more sharply. You would have been right. He moved around the table slowly, stopping at a proper distance. What do you authorize tomorrow? The question settled between them like a vow remade. I enter first, she said. You stand beside me. Mr. Holbury lays out the documents only when I ask him. Mills speaks before Cyprian, because fear should be named before cowardice excuses itself. Lady Eudora hears the evidence before she is answered, not shouted down. My father hears what his hunger helped expose, but he is not permitted to turn himself into the injured party. And me? He asked quietly. She looked at his hands, strong and still at his sides. You do not rescue me from speaking. You do not punish anyone before the truth is complete. And if I falter, you may offer your hand, not take mine. His voice lowered. I understand. She believed that he did. The realization frightened her more than distrust had. Distrust was simple. This was not. This was the dangerous growth of reliance. Tender in places she had thought scarred beyond use. The rain thickened. Somewhere beyond the door, Mrs. Thiel passed, with instructions for dinner, then faded away. Leocadia looked down at the prayer book. The myrtle is almost black now. It was crushed. Yes, that does not mean it is dead. She looked up. You sound very certain for a man who confessed to neglecting chapel gardens. I wrote to Wyntham. The head gardener says myrtle can sometimes be coaxed from damaged stems if one is patient and not too proud to ask advice. She knew he was not speaking only of plants. The room seemed to draw closer, though neither moved. A useful lesson for dukes, she said. A severe one. You may need several. I expect so. This time, the smile reached them both. It was small, but it survived the rain. Aurelian's gaze lowered to her mouth, then returned immediately to her eyes, so disciplined that the restraint itself felt like a touch. Leocadia's pulse changed. She was not naive. She understood what a kiss was meant to signify within marriage, within privacy, within the dangerous territory between gratitude and desire. But this was not gratitude. Not now. She had seen him err and answer for it. She had seen him defend without possessing, wait without demanding, and listen until silence became shelter. The wish that rose in her was not sudden. It had been growing in all the spaces where he had asked, rather than assumed. Aurelian stepped back half a pace, as if he had read the danger in himself and chosen distance. Forgive me. For what? Wanting what has not been offered. The honesty moved through her more softly than flattery ever could. She closed her hand around the edge of the table, steadying not fear but courage. Aurelian. His name altered the room. He went very still. Yes, if you ask, I will answer. For a moment, she thought even he might falter. Then he bowed his head, not to hide from her, but to gather the care the question deserved. May I kiss you? The words were quiet. Human, almost uncertain. Leocadia stepped closer before answering, because she wanted no confusion between permission and pity. Yes. He came no nearer until she had lifted her face. Then he bent and kissed her with a restraint that made room for her choice inside every breath of it. No claim, no urgency, only warmth, reverence, and a tenderness so carefully held that it nearly broke her. Leocadia's free hand rose to his sleeve, not to push him away, but to remain. The kiss ended before propriety, fear, or memory could turn against it. Aurelian drew back first, his eyes dark and unguarded in a way she had never seen. Thank you, he said, then seemed to realize the inadequacy of it. She almost laughed, softly this time. That is a very ducal response. I am trying not to be a foolish one. You succeeded. The rain eased against the glass. Tomorrow, the vestry waited with its records, witnesses, lies, and old stone memory. Lady Eudora would come armed with poise. Lady Pentrith would come armed with rank. Cyprian would come with fear. Lord Septimus would come with wounded pride disguised as fatherhood. Leocadia would come with the truth. She took up her prayer book, the crushed myrtle hidden safely inside, and walked with Aurelian to the library door. He reached for the handle, then stopped and looked at her. The smallest question, the most important one. She opened the door herself. The chapel vestry smelled exactly as Leocadia remembered. Cold stone, beeswax, old paper, and the faint mineral dampness that clung to sacred rooms even in late spring. For a moment, standing before the closed door with her prayer book held against her heart, she was again the bride who had watched Lord Cyprian Bexley step back before the vows and crush the myrtle beneath his shoe. Then Aurelian's presence settled beside her, steady and close, without crowding. He did not reach for the handle. He did not ask whether she was certain. He only waited, as he had promised, while the narrow passage behind them held its breath. Leocadia opened the door herself. Inside, the room was already arranged with brutal simplicity. Mr. Ardent, the chaplain, stood beside the register table, pale but composed. Mr. Holbury had placed his document case upon a chair, not yet opened. Lady Aurelia Bexley sat near the wall as witness and guardian of propriety. Lord Septimus Harrowden stood stiffly by the window, his face arranged into injured fatherhood. Lord Cyprian Bexley sat with his hat clenched in both hands, looking like a man who had spent 6 weeks discovering that cowardice did not end when one ran away. Lady Pentrith occupied the best chair, as if rank could consecrate theft. Lady Eudora stood behind her mother, green silk replaced by blue today, innocence recolored, but not improved. Mills, the Pentrith footman, waited near the door with his eyes lowered. Mrs. Vaylley sat apart in plain black, hands folded, frightened and determined. Several witnesses from the original ceremony had been admitted. Enough for memory to have an audience and lies to have nowhere elegant to hide. Leocadia walked to the table. Aurelian came beside her, not ahead. She placed the prayer book before her and opened it to the dark, flattened myrtle. A murmur passed through the room before shame could stop it. "This," she said, lifting the bruised sprig carefully, "is not evidence. It proves no signature, no errand, no debt. It is here because this room began by pretending that my pain was the least important object in the chapel. I will not let it remain so." Lady Eudora's chin lifted. "Very touching, Your Grace, but sentiment cannot alter facts." "No," Leocadia said. "That is why we have brought facts." She turned to Mills. "You accused me at Lady Pentrith's supper of giving you a message counter and instructing you to summon Lord Cyprian from the altar. Was that true?" Mills swallowed so hard the sound seemed to strike the panelling. Lady Pentrith said sharply, "The man has already spoken." Aurelian's voice cut in, level and cold. "He will speak again where interruption has consequences." Mills looked at Leocadia then, and she saw terror, poverty, and shame all at once. "No, Your Grace," he whispered. "It wasn't true." The room shifted. Lady Pentrith went white beneath powder. "Mills, who instructed you?" Leocadia asked. His hands shook. "Miss Garth brought the counter from Lady Eudora's dressing room. She said I was to go to the chapel vestry and wait for Lord Cyprian. She said if questions came later, I was to say the bride had sent me." "Why did you agree?" "My sister's cottage, Your Grace. Lady Pentrith's steward said she could be turned out before midsummer." Mrs. Vaylley closed her eyes briefly, as if some old pattern had been named at last. Leocadia nodded to Mr. Holbury. "Now the documents." The solicitor opened his case. One by one, he laid out the original silver Pentrith counter found near the vestry step. The sign-out entry showing a counter taken by Lady Eudora's maid hours before the ceremony, Mr. Ardent's vestry attendants, slip naming Mills, the rent receipt for his sister's cottage paid through Lady Pentrith's steward, and Mrs. Vaylley's signed statement that Lady Eudora had long used household counters for private errands. Each piece landed softly on the table. Each soft sound broke something louder. Lady Pentrith rose. "This is a vulgar ambush." "No," Leocadia said. "A vulgar ambush is inviting a woman to supper and setting a frightened servant to ruin her before soup has cooled." Aurelian's hand moved slightly near hers. "Open," offered. She placed her gloved hand in his without looking away from Lady Pentrith. His fingers closed with careful steadiness, and the strength of it moved through her like a candle refusing wind. "Lord Cyprian," she said. Cyprian flinched. "Look at me," he did, barely. "Why did you leave the altar?" His face crumpled, not into nobility, but into the exhausted ugliness of self-preservation cornered at last. "Because I was afraid. Of me? No. Of marriage? No. Of debt? Of exposure? Of being made a fool?" Aurelian's voice was dangerous. "You chose to make her one instead." Cyprian covered his face for a moment, then dropped his hands. "Eudora said the bond could disappear. She said, if I left before the vows, Leocadia would be taken home quietly. She said no one would blame me once it was understood that she had been ambitious, that she had wanted Aurelian all along. I thought it would be managed. I didn't think." "No," Leocadia said. "You did not." Silence answered for him. Lady Eudora laughed once, a brittle little sound. "This is absurd. Lord Cyprian is disgraced and desperate. A servant is frightened. A former companion is bitter. How convenient that all their stories now serve the new Duchess. Convenience, Aurelian said, is what you promised my brother in exchange for abandoning his bride. Lady Eudora turned on him, beauty sharpened by panic. You would believe her over me? Leocadia felt Aurelian's hand tighten only enough to be felt. He looked at Eudora as if she had revealed the smallness of her world in one sentence. I believed my wife before this room became comfortable enough to follow. The words entered Leocadia more deeply than praise. Lady Pentrith tried a final weapon. If this proceeds, Your Grace, the scandal will touch House Bexley as much as mine. Then House Bexley will endure the truth better than House Pentrith has endured its absence. Mr. Holbury then read the debt bond summary. Cyprian's obligation. The creditor tied to Lady Pentrith's brother. The note implying relief if the chapel event proceeded. The room listened now because the room had no choice. Even Lord Septimus looked shaken, though not purely by conscience. When Mr. Holbury named the Larkswell obligation found near the debt route, Leocadia turned to her father. You knew my marriage to Cyprian had become useful to debts before it became useful to me. Lord Septimus's lips thinned. I sought stability for you. You sought rescue for yourself. Leocadia, don't speak to me as though I am your enemy. Her voice softened, which made the words worse. Then, do not stand among my enemies and ask me to mistake you for shelter. He looked away first. In that moment, something old and heavy loosened inside her. Not love for him, that would be too easy. Not hatred. Something cleaner, separation. Aurelian addressed the room then, not as husband alone, but as Duke. Lord Cyprian Bexley will be placed under financial trusteeship effective immediately. He will leave London for the Bexley estate in Northumberland until his affairs are settled and his conduct can no longer injure my wife. Mills's sister will not lose her cottage. If Pentrith House turns her out, Bexley Land will receive her. Lady Pentrith and Lady Eudora will not be received at Bexley House, Wyntham House, or any table where my influence determines the guest list. Mr. Holbury will circulate the corrected account to every witness present at the original ceremony and to those who heard the accusation at supper. Lady Eudora's composure finally broke. You cannot ruin me for wanting what she stumbled into. Leocadia looked at her across the dark myrtle and the bright silver counter. I did not stumble into your place, Lady Eudora. I stood in mine after you tried to empty it. No applause followed. This was not a ballroom triumph. It was better. It was record, consequence, and silence from those who had once whispered freely. Mr. Ardent opened the chapel register and made the memorandum Mr. Holbury dictated, noting the correction of the false allegation and the evidence presented. Ink moved over paper in the same room where humiliation had first been made public. Leocadia felt Aurelian's hand still holding hers. She turned to him. The room was not gone. The witnesses remained. Yet his face held such open, disciplined emotion that the world seemed to narrow to the space between their joined hands. I love you, Leocadia, he said, not loudly, loud enough. Her heart stopped, behaving like something trained for caution. She had been protected by him, wounded by him, heard by him, and now, before the room that had first seen her abandoned, loved by him without disguise. She did not hide behind gratitude. She did not hide behind title. And I love you, Aurelian, she said. His breath changed, only that. Only enough for her to know the words had reached the man beneath the Duke. Around them, Lady Pentrith sat defeated. Eudora stared, as if love itself were an insult she had not planned for. Cyprian wept silently into hands too late to be honourable. Lord Septimus looked old, not forgiven, not destroyed, merely seen. Leocadia gathered the crushed myrtle and placed it back inside her prayer book. "I would like to go to Wyntham," she said, "where this may yet live." Aurelian bowed his head over their joined hands. "Then we go home." Wyntham House appeared at the end of a long Kentish avenue on a morning washed clean by early summer rain. Its grey stone front rose beyond lawns bright with new grass, not as grandly as some duke seats that demanded awe from a mile away, but with an older steadiness, the kind that seemed to have watched generations make vows, break them, repair what could be repaired, and bury what could not. Leocadia sat beside Aurelian in the carriage, with a prayer book on her lap and the crushed myrtle tucked safely within it. The journey from London had taken them through villages, turnpikes, posting inns, and fields where hedgerows were beginning to foam with blossom. At first, the distance from Mayfair had felt impossible to trust. London had been noise, accusation, mirrors, witnesses, and rooms where every candle seemed lit to expose her. Kent gave her birdsong, damp earth, and silence that did not wait to be filled by gossip. "There it is," Aurelian said. His voice held no prideful flourish. If anything, it carried caution, as if he were not showing her possession, but offering her a place that might still refuse to become home if she did not choose it. Leocadia looked through the carriage window at the house, then at the small chapel just visible beyond a line of yews. Its square tower rose modestly against the pale sky. Scaffolding stood near one wall, and beyond it, two gardeners moved across a cleared bed with baskets, twine, and tools. Her breath caught before she could stop it. "You began already." "I asked first. You asked whether it would comfort me. I did not know you had written so quickly. I was afraid patience might be mistaken for delay." She turned toward him, "And impatience for command. That too. I have been attempting the narrow road between them." The answer was so grave that she smiled, and this time there was no room full of enemies to steal the expression from her. His gaze rested on it for one unguarded moment. Then the carriage halted before the front steps, and the household emerged. Mrs. Penlow, the Wyntham housekeeper, curtsied deeply. The steward bowed. Footmen stood in proper line, yet nothing in their welcome had the brittle curiosity of Bexley House during those first days. News had reached Kent, of course. Corrected news. Mr. Hulbury had seen to that. The original chapel witnesses had received the memorandum. Lady Pentrith's invitations had begun returning unanswered. Lady Eudora had gone to relatives in Bath under the thin fiction of health. Lord Cyprian had been sent north under trusteeship, and for once his charm had no one left to pay its debts. Lord Septimus had written twice. Leocadia had answered once, with kindness enough to be civil and distance enough to be free. At Wyntham, she stepped from the carriage not as a question, but as Duchess. Aurelian did not lead her up the steps until she had greeted the housekeeper herself. "Mrs. Penlow," Leocadia said, and heard no tremor in her own voice. "I am glad to come at last." The woman's curtsy deepened. "We are honored, Your Grace." Not rescued, not installed, honored. The word followed Leocadia through the hall, past portraits and polished oak, into rooms where curtains had been opened, fires set lightly against the damp, and flowers placed without excess. Aurelian had spoiled her, society would have said, had society seen the writing desk set near an east-facing window in the Duchess's sitting room, the tray arranged for private tea rather than display the list of callers placed under her authority, the receiving day chosen for a date she approved, and the chapel garden restored before any ballroom jewel had been offered. but society would have misunderstood. Jewels could glitter over a wound. This was different. This was care shaped like choice. Several days later, after she had walked the house, met the tenants, wives who came with cautious offerings of eggs and early strawberries, and chosen which rooms should remain quiet and which should wake again, the head gardener sent word that the myrtle cutting was ready. Leocadia stood in her dressing room with the prayer book open on the table. The sprig inside was no longer beautiful. It was dark, flattened, and fragile, but one small section had been preserved by the gardener's careful hand. From it, with patience and skill, he had coaxed a cutting tender enough to tremble in its little clay pot. Aurelian waited near the door, not entering until she looked at him. "The gardener says it may not take," he said. "He wished me to tell you that honestly. Honesty seems a suitable beginning for it. He also says if this one fails, we may plant another myrtle and still keep the sprig in the chapel book." She touched the brittle leaves. "No, let this one try first." He understood. Of course he did. They walked to Wyntham Chapel in the mild afternoon, without guests, without witnesses required to prove anything. The chapel door stood open. Inside, fresh limewash softened the walls. The repaired roof kept the old damp from the stones, and sunlight entered through clear glass in bars of gold. Beyond the side path, the new bed had been cleared and edged. There were no extravagant flowers, only soil turned dark and ready, a few lavender plants, and room for roots. Leocadia knelt carefully, and Aurelian knelt beside her without making a ceremony of assistance. The gardener had left the small trowel there. She took it herself. "My mother would have laughed," she said, pressing the blade into the soil. "At being planted in a ducal chapel?" Aurelian asked. "At my thinking any plant could be told what rank it had entered. Wise woman she was, she would also have liked you, though she would have scolded you. For neglecting chapel gardens, for needing to be taught that women are not ledgers." His mouth softened. She would have been right. Leocadia placed the myrtle cutting into the earth. Its leaves were small, green, and uncertain. She pressed soil around it with gloved fingertips, not too hard. Aurelian held the pot steady until she was done, then withdrew his hands. Even now, after embrace, kiss, love spoken before witnesses, and weeks of shared quiet, he never treated one permission as a permanent claim upon the next. That was one of the ways she knew the love would last. When the cutting stood upright, fragile but present, Leocadia sat back on her heels. "There," she said, "not restored." "No," Aurelian said, "rooted." The word moved through her like a bell in clear air. She rose, and he rose with her. For a while, they stood beside the new bed, looking at the little plant that had come from what Cyprian had crushed and Eudora had tried to turn into shame. Leocadia thought of the chapel in London, the cold vestry, the ink in Mr. Ardent's register, Mills's shaking confession, Cyprian's collapse, her father's averted eyes. All of it remained true. None of it owned her. Aurelian turned slightly toward her. "I once thought protection meant standing between you and harm." "You did." "Then I thought it meant preventing pain before it reached you. You tried. Now I think love means making room for your choice, even when I fear what the room will do to you." She looked at him, this man who had begun as cold rank in a ruined chapel and become the steadiness beside which she could hear herself think. "That is much better," she said. "Still imperfect. Naturally, you are still a duke." His laugh was quiet, startled, and so rare that it felt like something entrusted to her. She stepped closer. Not because he asked, because she wished to. "I love you, Aurelian." His face changed with the same wonder it had held in the vestry, as if the words could not become ordinary, no matter how often she gave them. "I love you, Leocadia." She took his hand and drew it, slowly and clearly, to her cheek. His breath caught. He did not move beyond what she had chosen. His gloved fingers rested there with such care that tenderness itself seemed to learn restraint from him. Then he lifted her hand and kissed her gloved fingers. One brief, reverent touch. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him softly, a wife's kiss freely given in the quiet of a chapel path, with no scandal watching and no fear hiding beneath it. When they drew apart, the afternoon remained gentle. Bells did not ring. No crowd applauded. No enemy was there to be defeated. That was the peace of it. They walked back toward Wyntham House, side by side, her hand resting on his arm, by choice, the young Myrtle taking root beside the chapel wall behind them. The plant was small. The world was not suddenly kind. But Leocadia had a room of her own, a name publicly restored, a household that waited for her voice, and a husband who had learned that spoiling her meant remembering her hunger, honoring her boundaries, defending her truth, and loving her without possession. At the turn in the path, she looked back once. The myrtle leaves stirred in the breeze, green against the dark earth. No longer an emblem of the moment she was abandoned, but of the life she had chosen afterward. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.